Hey, what's going on? We're back at East Broad Street Studios on Saturday, and we're going to be doing our second stream. I'd like to introduce you to a friend of mine named Brittany Curry. Hi.
Hello, and hello.
This is Inky Brittany, a graphic recorder who is doing some pretty amazing stuff in Savannah. We're going to just sit and talk like we do here. This is unscripted. This is a real conversation, and it is not censored for primetime viewing. Good luck. All right, so me and the production man were just talking about Milledgeville and a 100-year legacy there. So catch people up to speed on that.
Well, I grew up here in Savannah, and I went to Milledgeville to go to school, to go to college. And I wound up living there for a long time after I graduated. And my first job there, I knew that for like the generations before me, the town had had a really thick legacy because it was at one time it was Georgia, the home of Georgia's big state-run psychiatric facility. And not only was it the central one for Georgia, it was really the largest one in the country, and some say in the world. And going there 18 years old, I didn't really know that, but quickly when I got into town and especially with the first job and, my first career, that became something that I started thinking a lot more about.
Right, right. What was your first job there?
So I was the coordinator of the Citizen Advocacy office in Milledgeville for about 5 years. People might be familiar with the work of Chatham Savannah Citizen Advocacy here that brings people together in relationships. One of those people is somebody with a developmental disability who's really being pushed into this world of disability, and somebody else who will be their friend and advocate and ally and spokesperson. And that was the work that I got into in Milledgeville.
In Milledgeville?
Yeah.
In this, you said it's a 100-year legacy or close to it, maybe?
I've got to be fact-checked on the time when the institution really first began to grow larger and larger, but I think it was for sure happening during the Civil War and around that time.
Okay. So we've got perhaps the world's largest, but certainly Georgia's largest psychiatric facility. 1842?
42, yeah. So way before
that, yeah. Thank you, Mr. Ocean Man.
I feel like
And the work with citizen advocacy is taking place in this place that has a 100-year legacy of shelving human beings. I guess if we're going to look at it for
hadn't quite thought of it like that, but yeah, pretty much.
One of our conversations this week, you said, if somebody's got a disability, they're not included in everything.
Exactly, I did say that, and I hadn't used the exact word shelving, but that is in
that's
fact,
mine, yeah.
No, that's really what happens. We have created places where people who have differences go. We erect entire systems around their
industries, right?
Industries around their care, and that was what was going on in Milledgeville for a long time. Some people, there's a lot of different angles and a lot of different viewpoints that you could take, right? Some people are very certain that it was the seat of medical and scientific innovation, and that it was the place where attracted, doctors from all around the world, and it was a site for.
Was it still open during like lobotomy times?
Yes, that would be a place where a lot of people were experimented on during the reign of this time where medical science and experimentation ruled the day. So when you're looking at it from the angle of the people who lived in those settings and never had any representation other than their,
legal.
And the staff that paid, caregiving staff.
So for 100 years, the main employer in the area was a psychiatric facility that were still using barbaric old techniques on human beings and experimentation, which is not new to Georgia. Well, if you haven't heard about the Tuskegee experiments, those didn't end until the 70s. And that's another experimentation on marginalized and devalued human beings, but that's not the topic of this conversation right now. So let's stop right there for a second because I want to tie this into what you do and what I've known, how I first came across you. So you returned to Savannah, and you're a graphic recorder, right? And I've seen you work, and you described to me what you do. And when I described it to somebody, they said, it's kind of like an artist stenographer. I said, in one aspect, but on deeper, tell me your background in communication.
From as early as a child can form their dreams of what they want to be when they grow up, I always want to be a journalist. I'm a fierce writer. I'm really a writer. And I went into college as a pre-mass communications major because I thought journalism, media. And I quickly realized that media communication and human communication, that I was really enjoying learning about, my civilization classes. So that led me to really concentrating in rhetoric, right? That was one of my highest disciplines in my liberal studies major. And that's being able to take, like, for example, a speech and not just hear what words the person's saying, but hear what's underneath it, what's around it, the context, really situate it and slice it and dice it. And that is really what communications is really what I focused on.
So you take the core and the meaning and all the hidden context of this, and you turn that into a graphic in real time until COVID times hits, and now you transcribe. But from when I first came across Brittany, she had this giant piece of paper, and there was a room with about 30-something people in it, and there was a conversation going on. And during this conversation, she was mapping it out in real time, pointing arrows and putting words inside boxes because there were concepts that needed to stand out, and then all the context around it. And it made a fantastic reference point because you know how it goes in a conversation. There's a lot going on, and something very important may get lost because something else was happening. So you could go back to this, and you've adapted that for corporate environments as well, correct?
Across so many different spectrums and industries, from corporate stuff to the micro, working with individual people, I have done so many different incarnations of this, what I call visual communication in broad terms. That's
pretty cool. I like that visual communication because now, getting back to where we started with the Milledgeville story and what you do with graphic recording, you mentioned citizens advocacy and that you worked for a 12-year period.
5. I lived in Milledgeville 12, but worked in there for 5.
Thank you. So you worked there for 5 years. Tell me how old were you? Well, when you started that, I learned that lesson earlier.
That's okay. I'm happy to say it.
Word. So you worked there for 5 years. What was it like when you went in, and what did you go there expecting? What did you go there walking away with? And I know you told me there were some key inspirational people and human beings who you saw the work that they had accomplished. And then I think, if I remember correctly, something happened and you saw the true value of what you do as a graphic recorder and how that can be used for this passion of yours, citizen advocacy.
Yeah.
So when you walked into it, tell me.
Well, thank you for asking me that question, and thank you for inviting me into this time and space.
For sure.
When I first got involved with the organization, it was as a board member. And for the first 6 months, I think I was running around telling people that it's a lot like Big Brothers, Big Sisters, because it has that component of matching people in one-to-one relationships. Here's what I learned quickly is that while a lot of those buddy, or I won't call it buddy, but a lot of those matching volunteer programs, a lot of them do result in people being involved with each other long-term, but that's not the expectation when you go, right? When you sign up for that, it's a short-term commitment. You're also asked to submit like a background check. You're also asked to fill out paperwork. And there's all these things around that arrangement that don't really resemble what typical relationships are like, right? Like, think of how you and I met each other in the community setting, around all of our mates, we're at public events, like all the things that mark how friends come to be.
Yeah.
And
without being staged.
Yes, and citizen advocacy, although it is initiated by the Citizen Advocacy Office, once the two people are introduced and they've decided that they are interested and they think they can go forward together, the office becomes support for them, but the office doesn't track or log or manage or mediate those relationships because it's
its own thing.
The advocate is not volunteering for citizen advocacy. They're, Bob and Bill are going out to lunch on Wednesdays. And so that's how I learned. Like, that's when I walked in and what I began to see quickly. Mm-hmm.
That's interesting because I think we were in the park and you described a volunteer situation where it was very separate and obvious to the rest of the community and not like just two homies sitting down on the park bench or going for a walk or something.
I'll say this, after being involved in this work for 10 years almost, 10 years officially, there are all kind of things out there that are presenting as, and they're all coming from very well-meaning and good-hearted places. There's no question about that.
Yeah.
There's no question about that.
Intention
people's
is
motives.
Pure. Yeah.
People's motives aren't really the question. It's when you look when you look a little bit deeper at what is offered in terms of the name of helping people with disabilities or including people with disabilities, still so often follow that segregated model, that congregated, segregated model. Other things associated with that is like charity and pity and people being the recipient of something.
That emotion being tied to it.
And so in the thinking of citizen advocacy is that people should be known for their gifts, for what their strengths are. And it's hard to see somebody's individual uniqueness when they're in a clump of a whole bunch of other people with a whole bunch of different impairments, right? Like, it doesn't really make for a smooth pathway to really see somebody for who they are.
Right.
So that's where there's a lot of real harm and actual danger in continuing those congregated things that everybody seems to think is such, a nice idea, and it's not helping people make friends, legitimate friends.
Yeah,
and
you go hang out at the bar, go to trivia, the whole nine. Fall in love, whatever it is. Yeah. So you, and don't you got somebody you want to say happy birthday to?
Happy birthday yesterday to my best friend Rachel, as well as Tom Kohler. Obviously two very important and central people were born on the same day. I was thinking last night, January 15th. So. Mm-hmm.
Right on. And so that brings me to your citizen advocacy work here in Savannah and your path through that, because we both know Tom. I think everybody in town knows Tom. But you've done such good work that you're in a position to be able to use all your powers to bear and for good. So tell me.
Well,
when you got here, how long have you 2015?
I moved back to Savannah full time at the very end of 2016. So it's been 5 years now. Right. And while we were talking about Tom, and in honor of his birthday and life lessons that he's, helped people to see, is one way that he's done stuff for all these years is that he's helped people see, I think, that there was an assumption in the beginning with citizen advocacy that only really kind-hearted, do-gooder, bleeding-hearted people, angels and saints, were ever going to be involved with spending time with people with disabilities.
Right.
That was very common. Nobody's ever, because the thinking, it was the stereotypes and the stigmas during the 60s and 70s and before around people with mental and physical disabilities was the expectations were pretty low. So through all this time, there has been evidence that when people are asked and invited and then supported, that it's not only for people who have, do-gooder, bleeding-hearted values, but it also makes a lot of fiscal sense to people who believe that people should work and that people should take personal responsibility for things. That really appeals to a lot of people. That is the embodiment of not just shooting money or services at somebody, but taking some personal responsibility for
And moving your life into it.
for being involved in people's life. So not sure that was the exact answer to the question you're asking, but it was just a reflection that I wanted to say that I've learned more from, is about how this appeals to a wide variety of people, and that.
So it doesn't have to be the well-known philanthropist. It can be, but it could also be the dude that has the construction company and can
The greatest
go,
citizen-
hey yo, let me
Yeah.
give you a job here at my company.
Right. The most beautiful stories have been, and matches I personally made in Milledgeville, were people who were, hanging out at their farm and hanging out at the pub with their buddies and just good, red blood people. It's just it's not this, special, it's no,
It's
regular
genuine.
people can do this.
Right on. So how do you find these people?
How are citizen advocates found, or people who have developmental disabilities? How does citizen advocacy come into contact with people?
With citizen advocates, how are you able to find those people in the neighborhood that just good people?
Well, every search for a citizen advocate starts with the person for whom the coordinator, George Seborough, is thinking of matching. And George will spend time with that person and get a pretty good idea of where their life is situated and who would have what kind of qualities. If I'm going to ask an advocate to come in this person's life, what would be some really good qualities for that person to have? And then we go through a process. The staff, board members, other citizen advocates will help think, who do we know in the community who has those qualities? And through an invitation to sit down and have coffee with George, that's how individual and person to person this work really
Right on.
is.
So
Yeah.
it's really every individual is different in every
No mass
situation.
appeals, no marketing, no ads in the paper, no ads on Facebook, none of that stuff. That's all very impersonal, depersonalized ways of thinking about what do people really need. And you can think about it, who the person is deeply and what would really be beneficial to their life. There's so many wonderful people in Savannah who have both, in citizen advocacy, we say both heart and backbone.
Mm-hmm. Those are great qualities.
Who would say, well, yeah, sure, I think I could do that, especially with the support of the office.
Right on, and that's something that we talked about, is that every citizen advocate needs people that they consider that are in their orbit that they can call on and be like, yo, my homeboy needs this, can you help me out? He said he wants to grab this or she wants to grab this. I know you do that thing.
That is so one of the huge roles that advocates play, is kind of arranging. There's so many stories out there.
Creativity is a good quality then, I imagine.
Yes, people who have wide social networks, who are very involved. I remember thinking when I was first trying to recruit people, well, oh gosh, all these people are really, really living busy lives. That's exactly, if we're talking about somebody who's in social isolation, is surrounded by everything in group home world,
Right.
Who do they need to come into their life? Somebody whose life is
not
banging.
Yeah.
Who is totally rich and totally full of typical things and not special things.
Yeah. I could dig that. Just go to the cookout.
And not have to dress it up or, throw a lot of
Fanfare
on top of it, but just quietly. And that's another thing, back to your question about when I first stepped into it, what did I think and where did it go? I learned, because I got into this work in my college town in Milledgeville, came down to Savannah to train with the office here, quickly learned that growing up here in Savannah, so many of my friends' parents that I never knew had quietly been advocates for the last 35 years for a kid in the school system or somebody who needed help taking care of their finances every month.
Yeah.
And could use the just common sense help of somebody helping manage their budget.
Yeah, somebody who's good at balancing a checkbook.
And it was just this quiet, good stuff that's been going on now for over 40 years in Savannah.
Wow. 40 years.
Longer now, 42, because the 40-year anniversary was 2 years ago, I think.
I remember seeing the event on Facebook. So what's in the future? What's the next 10 or 40 years for citizen advocacy look like in Savannah?
I think we're in a really solid place.
This is not any national organization.
No.
These are people in their neighborhoods and their cities and their towns.
Citizen advocacy, there used to be a lot of offices when deinstitutionalization was happening and people with disabilities were being moved out of the central states and out of the Willowbrooks and out of the big state-run facilities. I just lost my train of thought.
We were talking about deinstitutionalization.
During that time, there were a lot of other advocacy efforts that came to the forefront: parent advocacy, legal advocacy, self-advocacy, people who were well able to speak for themselves. And citizen advocacy, the idea of one citizen being involved, is something that did not take hold and last everywhere the way that it did here in Savannah.
Oh, okay.
So in Georgia, Nebraska, a couple of places in Canada and Australia, and there's programs all over the world that are united through this idea.
Mm-hmm.
But Georgia has had, a solid several offices that have remained. And the Savannah office has continued throughout the pandemic to continue to make matches and recruit people and support relationships, even if it has to be out in the driveway and masked up and stuff. I've really admired George's relentlessness around continuing to make sure that people are, especially people who are already in heightened vulnerability,
Yeah.
who are in institutions. And now it was quite an adjustment, but he just had such a blaze forward attitude. And the reason the organization I think will stay solid is because it doesn't have, I really invite people to learn and look up more around the beginning story and the thinking about how it all got started.
You give me the links to all that. I'll make sure it's in the description of all this stuff. We have to.
But it's not in this scarcity mindset, right? Savannah has fallen in love with these stories. And whereas a lot of organizations are on very thin ice right now and struggling and wondering, the foundation there is so solid because so many local people support and care and believe strongly that this work should continue to go on.
I'm in agreement with that. That's a tremendous legacy, 40 years. For real.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
What else you want to tell us about?
Well, while we're talking about, maybe we could kind of fuse together the graphic facilitation journey and where citizen advocacy, where those went. So we'll just hang this whole conversation under, what did you think and this is where we started and this is how it's going.
Who is Inky Brittany?
So I found out when I became the coordinator and started hanging out with people with disabilities who I was trying to recruit advocates for, I got a big orientation. The average person, unless you related to somebody or you grew up with somebody who had a disability in your family, the average person does not understand really how separated people are.
Yeah.
So when I'm recruiting advocates and I'm describing to them what I'm trying to prepare them for, what they're stepping into, it's words are just not cutting it here. And I've told the story a million times, but I've learned about graphic facilitation at the Toronto Summer Institute in Canada, which is a big get-together every year for people who are interested in advocacy and inclusion.
All right.
And that's where I met people who have been using graphics in their planning meetings.
Right.
That's where putting a piece of paper up on the wall and somebody getting up there and capturing, that's how you find out somebody who doesn't use words to communicate. This is in the Waddy Welcome story that Tom Kohler and Susan Earle wrote together. It's a real story that happened in the early 90s and early 2000s.
Right.
And so that's when I was if I start to begin to communicate using these contrasting and drawing pictures for people, that was what I felt get people's attention and they would respond to more.
It works.
Yeah. So it started off as the side thing, and then by the end of 2016, came back here and
Right on, right on. And I think I don't have any other questions. That's what I really wanted to bring you here, because you're more eloquent about explaining citizen advocacy than I am, and you know more than I do.
Well,
but I think, yeah, I know, I'm not sure yet, but like, yeah.
Yeah,
I'm not
no,
sure. I'm
so
not sure how yet, but there's some skin to throw in this game for sure.
yeah, absolutely. And I appreciate so much. Anybody that like knows me knows that that's what is constantly like. I'm a graphic. I'm a graphic recorder, and like that's what I'm really, the work that I want to stay as close to as possible, and help people who I know do not have good information get better information, and that is what I am here to do.
That's the key to it, right? Having the correct information.
Yeah.
All right, so InkyBrittany.com, Inky Brittany on Facebook, on Instagram. Anything you want to tell anybody before we cut out of here?
Just again, thank you, and
get involved,
reach out to
motherfuckers.
me, get in touch. Easy to reach.
Thank you. Hey, sound man, will you make me go off?